Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, fellow League members, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Edward Terzansky. It's my honor and privilege to serve as chairman for this year's Union League of Philadelphia observance of Lincoln Day, presented by the League's Legacy Foundation. We're coming to you live via web stream from the Lincoln Memorial Room of the League's historic clubhouse in Center City, Philadelphia. To get us started, please join Javon Torres and Anthony Shoppy, Union League Good Citizen Award winners and scholars, as they lead us in a pledge of allegiance to our flag and our nation.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
welcome. Given the circumstances of what we already know is happening, this Lincoln Day is going to be different than other ones, but we're going to try to combine as many of the traditional elements of the program into this day as possible. For starters, you recognize that we are doing this virtually. By the way, although we're not in person with one another, our virtual presentation means that we have more people watching this program than would normally fit into Lincoln Ballroom in any given year. In fact, many more. So to all of you who have made the time to watch, thank you. Then there's the setting for this observance. About a half century after the end of the Civil War, Edwin Stewart, who was the then League president, he had been governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, said that the League had to create, and I quote, something in order that our successors understand and appreciate what the Union League stands for, and that we recognize the patriotism and valor of the men to whom we are indebted for the preservation of the Union. And that something is this Lincoln Memorial Room. It's called the Temple of Inspiration by those who designed it. In it, there are 8 plaques containing the names of the 555 League members who wore our nation's cloth to defend it during the War of the Southern Rebellion. Also at the top, there are 2 plaques with gold leaf engraved words, 272 words to be exact, that comprise one of the great title deeds of not just American, but indeed world history, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And at the base, there are marble steps leading to a podium upon which stands the visage of the great man, Abraham Lincoln, as he delivers the address. Lincoln's place in history and that of the Union League of Philadelphia is unmatched. Our Union League here in Philadelphia was the first of what would become 700 leagues spread across the country, all dedicated to providing moral and practical support for Lincoln in his effort to preserve the Union. And he sought to do that for the purpose of, and I quote, making our Union more perfect. The way he did it was to destroy once and for all the evil that was slavery, that peculiar institution which denied to men and women the promise of the Declaration of Independence that belongs to all of us by virtue of our humanity and the gift of God. Memorializing Lincoln's example and meaning is more important today than at other times when we have faced challenge in this country. Pandemic has been destructive, psychologically, physically, economically. It has devastated communities. And to compound that difficulty, we have an unrelenting discord within the culture caused by harsh political and racial rhetoric, which has taken our nation's motto, e pluribus unum, from one, many, and turned it on its head. Instead of coming together into a more unified union, these terrible forces in the culture have sought to pull us apart. So more than ever, we need to remind ourselves of the example of Lincoln to, quote, summon the better angels of our nature and to practice, quote, malice towards none and charity to all. Finally, quote, to bind up the nation's wounds, not to deepen them. To this noble calling, the Union League Legacy Foundation and the League are unalterably committed. And we're grateful to you for your support in helping us advance that work. At a particularly desperate time during the war, Lincoln was asked, Mr. President, where do you turn to when things are at their darkest? His answer, quote, to my knees. And so we shall pray. To lead us in prayer, we're fortunate to have fellow League member, His Excellency Timothy Sr., Auxiliary Bishop of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia and Rector of the St. Charles Borromeo Seminary. Following Bishop Sr.'s invocation, we'll hear from Ms. Joan Carter, 67th President of the Union League and the Chair of the Legacy Foundation, who will tell us a bit about the work of the foundation before she introduces our keynote speaker of the day. With that, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Ed, and good afternoon, everyone. Let's pause to remember that we are always and everywhere in the holy presence of God. God of life and peace, we give you praise and thanks for all your blessings in our lives. Today, we thank you especially for Abraham Lincoln, whose birth we commemorate, a leader who gave the last full measure to ensure that our union would endure. We are grateful that Lincoln's witness in defense of human rights and dignity has inspired so many to treasure the dream, the vision, and the principles on which our nation was founded. Above all, that we have been created by you, are loved by you beyond our imagining, and so are radically equal in your sight. As we gather virtually today, we are reminded that our nation continues to struggle to make that dream a reality, and that we are wounded and in need of healing. Since we gathered for Lincoln Day last year, we are more painfully aware of our vulnerability, of our need for one another and for God, as the COVID-19 pandemic has spread throughout the world. The virus has caused us to be physically distanced from one another, and so many have been separated from their friends and families. Please be close to them. And again, in the past year, we have been reminded of the grave evil of the sin of racism, that it remains all too real in our country and in the world, and of the painful division that it has caused, which Lincoln and so many in our nation have given their lives to eradicate. We ask your blessing upon President Joe Biden, all our elected officials, and all who work in public service, especially those who service in the military throughout the world, our police and other law enforcement officers. Inspire them to imitate the example of Abraham Lincoln and to work together for the common good of all, especially the poor and the most vulnerable in our society. Bless all healthcare workers, first responders, and all who are on the front lines caring for anyone affected by the pandemic. All who are suffering because of the virus, and grant eternal rest to those who have died. We thank you for the progress that has been made, but we continue to beseech you, dear God, to bring an end to the pandemic. Give us the grace to form a more perfect union for everyone in our country, especially those who for any reason have been held back, marginalized, or prevented from realizing your dream for them, Lord God. Thank you for the Union League of Philadelphia, for the community that we share and the blessings that we have received that enable us to be part of this fellowship. Give us the wisdom and insight to know how each of us can be ever more effective leaders in our community, to be instruments of peace and to bind up the nation's wounds. May we hear anew and be moved by the words of President Lincoln in his second inaugural address. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. May your holy name be praised forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you, Bishop Senior, and thanks, Ed. Before I introduce today's keynote speaker, I want to take a couple minutes and talk to you about the Legacy Foundation. The Legacy Foundation does a lot of things that most members are unaware of. As an example, we are the stewards of the League's historic collections. Our art collection alone is of immense value, and not just monetary value, although it is that, but it is known and recognized by museums all over the world. Our paintings and sculptures have been exhibited in museums from New York to San Francisco, in Moscow, in Dusseldorf, in St. Petersburg, and images from our collections are used every single year by major publishing houses in art books, history books, catalogs. This past year, we had one of our works of art on display at the White House. And behind me, this amazing bust of Abraham Lincoln was on display at Ellis Island, and over 1 million people saw it. We also maintain the Archival Collections, which is an unbelievable collection. We actually have a Tanner manuscript. The Tanner manuscript was written at the death of Abraham Lincoln as he lay dying by James Tanner. We also have an Emancipation Proclamation. And these and many other works are the responsibility of the Legacy Foundation to make sure that this heritage is preserved for future generations. We also are tasked with promoting the ideals of free enterprise and liberty as expressed in the Union League's bylaws. Over the past year, we produced over 70 virtual programs. And these aren't just your normal newsy TV things. These are programs that are geared toward who we are. Topics included the city of Philadelphia. I mean, can this city be saved? How can we make it competitive again? And COVID restrictions. Government, does this infringe on individual liberty? Is this constitutional? This coming spring, we have programs on the cancel culture, on the increasing attacks on free speech, and on racism and politics. So the Legacy Foundation also specifically targets young people who sadly are less and less exposed to the ideas, the principles on which our nation was founded. So this year, we held our 74th Good Citizen Day, and we awarded at that time over $350,000 in scholarships. All of this is led by our program chair, Steve Target, and executed by the executive director of the Legacy Foundation, John Miko. And I do want to give a special shout out for today's program to Joe Ianni and to Kira Foley-Tusman. So I don't have to tell you that 2020 has been a very strange year. The government shutdown affected all of us as members, but nobody was nearly as affected as our loyal staff. And I am very proud to say that Union League members raised and distributed over $700,000 to those who were furloughed. I've talked to a number of other clubs, and nobody else has done anything of this magnitude. And that brings me to you. So none of this work is possible without the generous and voluntary contributions that League members make to the Legacy Foundation, to those who want to promote our values, to the leaders of today and to tomorrow. So I take this moment to say thank you. We do appreciate what you do. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, David Blight. Professor Blight is a professor of history at Yale and director of the Gilman-Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery, Resistance, and Abolition. He's the author and/or editor of a dozen books, including annotated editions of Frederick Douglass's first two autobiographies. He's received the Bancroft Prize, the Lincoln Prize, the Frederick Douglass Prize, among others. And his book, which was published most recent book, which was published in 2018, was the first major biography of Douglass in nearly 3 decades. And for this, he received the 2019 Pulitzer Prize in History and the 2019 Gilder Lehrman Lincoln Prize. So, ladies and gentlemen, Professor David Blight.
Thank you very much, Joan. Thank you to Ed and to Bishop Senior and to all the members and board of the Union League. I'm proudly wearing the same badge you are, which was delivered to me by FedEx here about an hour and a half ago. So thank you. I've also got a little Frederick Douglass button on in case I don't know if you can see it, but there it is. This is a great honor to give this short keynote today for Lincoln's birthday celebration at the Union League. No more important and interesting place to do it than here. I've spoken before, I believe 2 times at the Union League. It is, of course, a magnificent building. If there's anyone in the audience who has never been there, you must go. It is many things, including, as Joan suggested, a great art museum. And would that we were somehow all in that magnificent Lincoln Room Memorial Hall that you have there at the Union League. I want to cut right to the chase, and I'm going to talk today about particularly Frederick Douglass's relationship with Abraham Lincoln, both in reality and in rhetoric. But I do want to pick up first on something Ed pointed to, and I applaud how Ed, in your opening remarks, you spoke quite honestly about the circumstances we are living in our country right now. And I just want to say that I do not think since 1861, we have quite faced in our political history a situation, and we've had other great dilemmas and great crises, of course, but we've never quite faced an element of our society that now have become, in effect, disunionist against the federal government, as we have experienced particularly on 6 January. This crowd or mob or rioters, whatever one wants to call them, have been called many, many things. But my favorite term for them, and for some of their enablers, has become disunionist. Because I think what we have to admit is that this particular political persuasion that they represented, and it has many different roots, do not really wish to or intend to live within the same republic as the rest of us. It is a crisis for which we have to have answers. And it is precisely why institutions like the Union League and other organizations that exist for education, public education about our past, are so important right now. There's a deep yearning across American society for some history that helps people get their footing. I want to begin by going to a Frederick Douglass quote from a very difficult moment during the war, the Civil War. This was February 1864, and many of you in this audience are great students of the Civil War. So think of that moment. The last year of the war has, well, nobody knows it's the last year of the war yet, has just begun. It is a terrible time in war weariness across the North, not least of which, of course, is across the South as well. But, and it's just the beginnings now of the election year of 1864. Could the United States even hold a general election in the midst of all-out civil war? That was a very big question at this point. Would Abraham Lincoln even get the nomination, the renomination of the Republican Party? There was already an effort within the party to dump Lincoln, as they said, advocating, some of them, for a candidacy of John C. Fremont, who had been the Republican candidate back in 1856, on the theory that somehow Fremont was more radical on the slavery issue. The Democrats, the other side, were already running against Lincoln and the Republicans, one of the most racist campaigns this country will ever see. They were portraying Lincoln and the Republicans as quote unquote end lovers, advocates of racial miscegenation. They were calling Lincoln Abraham Africanus I, implying that he was really black, and so on and so forth. It would be a vicious campaign. And they were using a classic wedge issue against President Lincoln. Classic wedge issue. They were painting the Republicans as the party of emancipation. And of course, they were by then. And the Democrats were going for the jugular by painting the Republicans as the party that was going to free black people, make them all equal, and overturn the United States as they understood it. Douglass, in February of '64, in one of his speeches, said this, and I started on this because it is a hopeful note, at least, a hopeful note from crisis. He said, quote, "The most hopeful fact of the hour is that we are now in a salutary school, the school of affliction. Affliction. If sharp and signal retribution, long protracted and overwhelming, can teach a great nation respect for justice, surely we will be taught now and for all time to come." The school of affliction, that's a Lincoln-esque idea. And I don't know for certain, but Douglass may have been drawing off some of the rhetoric of Lincoln by that time in the war. They had come by then to share a vision of the meaning of the war and the purpose of the war. They didn't necessarily start with that, but they had come to share almost the same script about the meaning and purpose of the war. School of affliction. I would suggest the United States right now is in a school of affliction. And how will we learn from our salutary school? What I want to do in my short time is essentially a few things. I want to at least mention that Lincoln and Douglas did meet 3 times. And many of you know this perhaps, but maybe I can clarify that a little bit. They did not meet a 4th time, although they almost did. And then I want to just suggest that Frederick Douglass, in his life of speaking about Lincoln, particularly after Lincoln's assassination, really created about 3 different varieties of Abraham Lincoln, which is, of course, what people always do, don't they? Throughout the last 150 some years, people make lots of Lincolns to fit their own time. They get right with Lincoln. Douglas did this variety of ways. But I want to begin first with a passage. It's a very short passage from one of the WPA slave narratives of the 1930s, this famous batch of more than 3,000 oral interviews done with former American slaves, many of them quite elderly by the time they were recorded. This was a former slave who was 91 years old, and he was interviewed in 1937. His name was Cornelius Garner. He was asked if he had fought in the Civil War, and Garner replied to his black interviewer, quote, "Did I fight in the war? Well, if I hadn't, you wouldn't be sitting there writing today." He described the corner in his native Norfolk, Virginia, where slave auctions used to be conducted, he said, on New Year's Day. That day, New Year's Day, said Garner, should be kept by all the colored people. That is the day of freedom. And they ought to remember, he said, Frederick Douglass too. Frederick Douglass told Abe Lincoln, says Garner, give the black man guns and let him fight. And Abe Lincoln say, if I give him a gun, when he come to battle, he might run. And then Douglas said, try him and you'll win the war. And then Abe said, according to Garner, all right, I'll try him. Now, this was one very elderly former slave black man's version of the relationship between Lincoln and Douglas. And it's not bad as a historical narrative. Douglas did try to persuade Lincoln toward the question of emancipation and the use of black soldiers. Lincoln didn't have to have Douglas persuading him. He did indeed do it on his own, from the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation to the final Emancipation Proclamation, and then the recruiting of black soldiers. But I've always found that passage from old Cornelius Garner so interesting in its basic meanings. Douglas and Lincoln do meet 3 times. The first was in August of 1863. Now, think of your context here. This is about a month and a half after the Battle of Gettysburg. It is some 7 months or so into the recruiting of black soldiers into the Union forces. Douglas himself had been a recruiter, a major recruiter of about 100 members of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, and 2 of those were his 2 sons, Charles and Lewis. Lewis had been badly wounded at the Battle of Fort Wagner in South Carolina. This first meeting between Lincoln and Douglas was not by invitation. Douglas simply went to Washington, D.C. on his own to protest the discriminations against black soldiers in the Union Army. As some of you may know, black soldiers served, but they served at less pay than white soldiers. They were not allowed to be commissioned officers, and they were often, not always, but often given inferior weapons. And they had experienced some brutalities in the Army from their own officers. And Douglas was fed up. He had stopped by then recruiting soldiers. And he just went to Washington. He'd never been in Washington, D.C. He went to D.C. He just got in line at the White House, the famous lines at Lincoln's office. He got in line, he put in his card and said, I want to speak to the president. And lo and behold, Lincoln let him in. They had probably a half hour to 40-minute exchange. They had what they say in diplomatic speak, a useful exchange of ideas. They didn't really agree on everything. Lincoln stood his ground. He said, well, look, I know there are discriminations out there, but I have done the best I can, basically, is what the president told Douglas. Douglas said, but you must do better, sir. But they had an honest discussion. And when Lincoln left, and in speeches he would give in the next month or so, and even in his newspaper, which he was soon to stop editing, he said he had never been in the presence of a powerful white man who treated him so honestly, so carefully, and so humanely. In fact, Douglas even said in a homespun phrase, he said, I felt big there. It's an interesting comment. Now, the second time they're going to meet is a full year later, August of 1864. This time, though, think of the context. This is the late summer of 1864. The war is in a terrible stalemate everywhere. In Virginia, in Georgia, with Atlanta under siege, even in Mobile Bay. The war is by no means over, and by no means even has a clear ending yet. And Lincoln believes he may lose the election in November. He wrote to Douglas and invited him to the White House to get his advice. And Douglas went. In this exchange, they probably met for at least an hour, if not more. And it was an extraordinary exchange of ideas. And Lincoln even floated a couple of ideas on Douglas about should he back off from this or that, about emancipation. And Douglas vehemently said, no, Mr. President. But most importantly, Lincoln had invited Douglas to the White House to ask him to be the chief architect and leader of a scheme to funnel as many slaves out of the Upper South into Union lines and then into the North, into some legal definitions of freedom before Election Day in November, in case Lincoln lost the election. This is how serious Lincoln was at this point, that he could easily lose this election to none other than George B. McClellan, the Democrats' candidate for president, the former general of the Union Army. And the Democrats were already well on record, although their platform was a bit vague, they were well on record at wanting to end the war. End the war short of universal emancipation of the slaves. And Lincoln brought Frederick Douglass to the White House and asked him to try to organize this scheme, which supposedly was to be run by the War Department and the Army before Election Day in case Lincoln loses the election, in order to get as many slaves freed as possible before possibly the white supremacist Democratic Party at that point in time took over power and might indeed negotiate a peace with the Confederacy. Douglas was stunned. He didn't write a lot about this meeting, but we do know he was stunned. First of all, he had no idea how he was supposed to run this scheme, except that he would be told to work with the War Department. He was asked to go back home to Rochester, New York, and engage as many abolitionists and agents as he could to help set up this system. And he did. He started writing letters and telegrams to many of the people he'd been associated with as recruiters of black soldiers. But in only a 2-week period, Douglas was, in effect, saved by events from ever having to try to enact such a scheme. He was saved, of course, by the fall of Atlanta, which happens in the first week of September, when Atlanta fell to Sherman. It was as big a turning point as the war had ever had, particularly in Northern morale. And then, even before that, on August 25th, Mobile Bay had fallen to Admiral Farragut. A huge event, a very important event. And then even in the Shenandoah Valley, General Phil Sheridan's troops were beginning to make major advances down the valley. So by early September there, even the first week of September, and certainly by mid-September, the war had made a huge turn. And Northern morale improved. Now, they didn't have any polling data then, but we do know that Northern morale turned. And in that election, of course, Lincoln was reelected. He was elected by about 55% of the vote and about 77% of the soldiers' vote, which is so telling. There's much more one could say about that circumstance, that meeting, and that turning point. I'll pass for the moment. The third meeting comes, of course, at the second inaugural. Douglas went to Washington, D.C. He was there in the audience, down off to Abraham Lincoln's left in the crowd. There is now, in what they can do in blowing up these photographs, imagery where you can just about see Lincoln in the crowd, Douglas in the crowd, excuse me, probably about a dozen to 15 people deep. He was just there. He went. He was going to hear this speech. And when it was over, Douglas went out onto Pennsylvania Avenue, got in line in the crowd, and walked all the way up Pennsylvania Avenue back to the White House behind the presidential carriage, and got in the line for the reception in the White House. He did not have an invitation. But he just got in line and he said, I want to come in. I want to see the president. And at first they told him, no, sir, you can't. You don't have a... And he said, send the message you had Frederick Douglass is out here. And pretty soon they came back and said, come on in. And many of you may know this story. And it is not only Douglas's telling we have, although that's most of our evidence, but there is at least one other eyewitness to this who was in the, I believe it was the East Room. Douglas went into the room. Douglas was 6'1½". Lincoln, of course, was 6'4". And Lincoln sees Douglas across the room, crammed with people. And he comes over to Douglas and he says, Mr. Douglas, I want to know what you thought of my speech. Douglas tells us that he demurred. He said, no, Mr. President, attend to all your guests. It doesn't matter what I think. And according to Douglas, Lincoln said, no, 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 Douglas, I value your opinion as high as anyone in the land. And then Douglas tells us he said to the president, Mr. President, that was a sacred effort. There are very few descriptions of that great second inaugural that are any better than that. We just heard the ending quoted about charity for all. Douglas was much fonder, I must say, and he would frequently quote it, the long middle paragraph of the second inaugural, especially the language where Lincoln promised that every drop of blood shed by the lash shall be answered with blood shed by the sword as long as it takes to prosecute and end the war. Now, I've just about run through my time, but I will say this. Frederick Douglass was a very crafty master of language, and he will create a variety of different Lincolns over time. In the wake of the assassination, he gave a speech in June 1865, where he gave in that speech what people most wanted to hear at that time. It was the savior Lincoln, the savior of the Union, the emancipator of the slaves. And he called Lincoln the black man's president. In the great speech he gives in 1876 at the unveiling of the standing Lincoln kneeling slave monument in Lincoln Park, now a quite controversial monument, a monument I hope they do not take down, and that's another story. Douglas gave one of his greatest speeches of all, in which he said, well, no, Abraham Lincoln was the white man's president. he said, "My fellow white Americans, you are Abraham Lincoln's children. I and my people are only his stepchildren." An amazing metaphor. But the brilliance of that speech comes halfway through where Douglas makes a shift and he says, however, quote, "under his rule and in good time, the manner by which we were freed was Lincoln's doing." And he acknowledged in that speech that Lincoln's caution, though it drove Douglas nearly crazy at times, and Lincoln's gradualism was probably the only real way emancipation could have happened in the midst of war. And last but not least, at near the end of Douglas's life in 1893, he gave yet another variety of a Lincoln eulogy speech, that time at a Republican club in Brooklyn, New York. Huge crowd, dinner, standing in front of a portrait of Lincoln, where Douglas trotted out again, the Savior Lincoln, the healer, the president of all. And he used the last part of the second inaugural, the charity for all. We are once again in a time of affliction. We need Lincoln. We need Douglas. We do need unity. But above all, we need justice. We need the balance of healing and justice at this time as much as we ever did after the Civil War. Thank you all for inviting me, and I look forward to the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Blight, for that absolutely extraordinary presentation. We are so much richer for the lessons of Frederick Douglass and Lincoln as you've explained them to us. And we're so very fortunate for the scholarship that you have brought to us over the years. And by the way, I bought your book on Amazon yesterday and I can't wait to read it. So with that said, let's talk about another good fortune. The Union League has always been fortunate to draw from the well of civic and professional engagement, people of extraordinary professional and moral accomplishment. And our next speaker is an exemplar of this truth. His life has been dedicated to service to our nation as a Marine Corps combat officer, service to his profession and our community as a lawyer with the firm of Buchanan, Ingersoll, and Rooney, service to his family as a devoted husband, father, and grandfather, and finally, service to the Union League as its past vice president for membership and currently its 72nd president. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to introduce to you President Craig Mills. Mr. President.
Thank you, Ed, for that very kind introduction, and even more so for all that you do and have done for the Legacy Foundation and the Union League. Yours has been a constant and a commanding presence at these Lincoln Day celebrations for many years, and I certainly hope that we can talk you into reprising your role here today for many years to come. I'd also like to thank Joan Carter and the entire Legacy Foundation for giving us today another truly meaningful Lincoln Day program. I regret that we can't all be together as we have been in years past, but as Ed mentioned, there are bright sides to the virtual format. Far more people are participating in our Union League program today than ever have before. Over 1,000 individual registrants, both members and non-members alike, smashing all prior attendance records, and that's fantastic. So again, my congratulations not only to Joan, but to John Miko, the director of our Legacy Foundation, as well as Bob Cavalier, our vice president for Legacy and Activities. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't need me to tell you that this last year has been one that was filled with challenges for all of us, both as individuals and the Union League as an organization. But I'm proud to report that your Union League is emerging from those challenging times, unified and strong. Unlike so many of our peer organizations around the country, our membership numbers are essentially unchanged from where they were when the pandemic first hit. And I'm delighted to see that all of our amenities particularly this glorious historic Union League House, are now open again for business and are bustling with activity to the maximum levels allowed by the current safety standards. The original founders of the Union League prized loyalty and courage as values and virtues. And it is gratifying, although not at all surprising, to see that the Union League members of today feel exactly the same way. The fact that we have come through this period of adversity with such strength and cohesion is only further proof, if any was necessary, that to become a member of the Union League is not like joining a club. John Mika likes to remind me from time to time that we are not a club. Clubs have fun, but a league has a purpose. And so it is with us. We are a cadre of patriotic civic leaders who strive to improve our community and our country by reminding our fellow citizens of everything that was, is, and can and should be good about America and our constitutional system of government. I think we've seen that in action here today with this Lincoln Day program. Now, I am not a historian and I'm not qualified, like Professor Blight, to deliver lectures, but I have been asked to add a short postscript to his superb talk on Frederick Douglass, to just tell you a little bit about the close personal connection between Frederick Douglass and the Union League of Philadelphia. The Union League was founded in 1862, just a few days before Lincoln issued his Emancipation Proclamation. And it was founded upon three bedrock principles for which Douglass fought all his life: unification, emancipation, and the Constitution. Now, all of us Union League members know that the first line of our bylaws begins, "Every member shall support the Constitution of the United States." And that is a sentiment with which Frederick Douglass wholeheartedly agreed. Like the founders of the Union League, Douglass believed that the Constitution, although not yet fully realized in its promise, was nevertheless founded on principles of natural right and human equality that rendered it, in the end, not just a great liberty document, as he referred to it, but an anti-slavery document. Douglass fought hard all his life to protect that document and to forward the causes of union and emancipation. And in doing so, he quite often fought side by side with members of our Union League. For example, on July 6, 1863, Frederick Douglass stood shoulder to shoulder with the leadership of the Union League at a rally held just a few steps from here on Chestnut Street to encourage African American men to join the United States Colored Troops regiments, which were then training at Camp William Penn. As many of you know, Camp William Penn itself was founded, funded, and operated largely through the efforts and the contributions of Union League members. Douglass returned to Philadelphia in 1866, where again, with members of the Union League, he launched the effort to pass the 15th Amendment, the amendment that gave African American men the right to vote. Douglass was a guest in this house on many occasions in his visit to Philadelphia, and Union League members were amongst his strongest and most staunch allies and friends throughout his life. Because of this close personal connection between Frederick Douglass and Union League, of which we are so very proud, I'm proud to announce that the Legacy Foundation has commissioned a new portrait of Frederick Douglass, which will hang alongside the other great leaders of the Civil War and the American patriots that are similarly honored on the halls of this historic Union League house. I very much look forward to the day when we unveil that portrait and Frederick Douglass takes his rightful place amongst the pantheon of patriots who we honor. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again, Union League members, friends, guests, and aides, for joining us today in this wonderful program on this wonderful day. I look forward to seeing you all very soon at one of our Union League amenities. Until that time, may God bless the United States and the Union League of Philadelphia. And let me turn it back to your capable hands.
Thank you, Mr. President, for those inspirational words. It's easy to see why it is that the Union League commends the kind of quality in its leadership as evidenced by President Mills. Ladies and gentlemen, two of the traditional elements of Lincoln Day at the Union League are, first of all, the recitation of the Gettysburg Address, usually by a Lincoln reenactor on the Broad Street portico, and also the placement of memorial wreaths at Independence Hall. We're going to recreate that in Lincoln Memorial for you today. And reading the Declaration of Independence the How about the Gettysburg Address? Reading the Gettysburg Address will be the 61st president of the Union League, Mr. James Straw. And the placement of 4 wreaths will be done by the following individuals. The General Meade Society wreath will be presented by General George Gordon Meade, victor of the Battle of Gettysburg, winner of the Union League Gold Medal, as portrayed by League member Professor Andy Waskey, and accompanying him is Mr. Robert Cavalier, Vice President for Legacy and Activities. The Benjamin Franklin Legion Post 405 wreath will be presented by Major General and Mrs. George H. Thomas, as portrayed by Bill and Peggy Vossler, members of the post. The United States Colored Troops 3rd Regiment wreath will be presented by members of the 3rd USCTs, as portrayed by Albert L. and Rob Huston. And the Union League wreath will be presented by League Vice President Dan Fitzpatrick and League member John Rigo.
Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work, which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that this government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Abraham Lincoln, November 19th, 1863.
Ladies and gentlemen, at the conclusion of our program, here's something that you won't see, but we wanted you to know it's going to happen. President Mills is going to lead a small group of League leaders to Independence Hall, where he will recite a speech made by President Lincoln on the occasion of his visit to the hall as he was making his way to his first inauguration. We'll also lay a wreath at the place where Lincoln spoke. Unlike other years, there won't be large numbers of reenactors. There won't be a parade. There won't be a police escort. There won't be crowds lining the streets to watch us doing it. So the question is, to what end? Why are you going to do that? The answer is self-evident. Lincoln matters. Our shared history matters. Tradition matters. And the union that we have spoken of so heartfeltly today matters. An organization formed in the heart of the Civil War to protect the Union and the Constitution, and which in each of this nation's conflicts has stood by our armed forces in material and moral ways, and which promotes love of country through education and acts of civic decency. An organization like the Union League is called to defend this union, this one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll do it because it matters. To close our program, we're now going to turn to the chairman of the Legacy Foundation Program Committee and a past vice president of the Union League, Mr. Steve Target. Following Steve's remarks, please do stay with us to enjoy the Civil War era period musical stylings of Mr. Charlie Zahn and the traditional ending of our Lincoln program at the League House, the Orpheus Club's rendition of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Thank you once more, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us. We really look forward to being with you in person next year at Lincoln Day. And now, Mr. Target, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Ed, and certainly thank you to the entire Legacy Foundation team for putting together such a great program today. Well, today I join you from the northern suburbs of Philadelphia rather than our League House. And for many fellow Union League members, Lincoln Day has long been one of the highlights of our League calendar. It's a time for us to socialize and celebrate together. And for many of us, we may continue the festivities in the old cafe after the formal program, sometimes perhaps well into the afternoon. Well, this year we can't all be together. I know there are many of you that are still celebrating on your own, in your own way. So I think it's appropriate to propose a toast. I'd like to propose a toast to our fellow Union League members and to all those who are celebrating with us this afternoon. I ask you to charge your glasses, ladies and gentlemen, to the Union League of Philadelphia, and to all those who share in the sentiments of our motto, love of country leads. Hear, hear, cheers. Well, one of the other great Union League traditions for Lincoln Day celebration is that we would, as I mentioned, gather down in the old cafe and we would be entertained with period appropriate music. So this year, in true COVID virtual fashion, I'm pleased that we can continue this tradition by bringing to you live from the Union League of Philadelphia, Mr. Charlie Zahn. Charlie.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Charlie Zahn could not be with you today. My name is Captain Joseph Lang, of the 79th New York Highlanders, a Scottish-American regiment, and it's a joy and an honor to be with you here today at the beautiful Union League. I'd like to start at the end. May 23rd to 24th, 1865, 150,000 men descended on Washington, D.C. in the last grand review of the Union Army. And they marched in front of then President Andrew Johnson, various dignitaries, various generals. And it was the last opportunity they'd have to see each other before they went home to their various corners of this young republic. But what are those men who gave their last measure of devotion to this country, to sew back the fabric of the Union torn asunder by this rebellion in the South? What of them? And what of their leader, Abraham Lincoln, who also gave his life to this country? Francis Hart, shortly after the American Civil War, wondered the same thing, and he wrote, I read last night of a grand review in Washington's chiefest avenue. 200,000 men in blue, I think they said was the number. till I seemed to hear their trampling feet, and the bugle blast, and the drum's quick beat, and the clatter of hooves on the stony street, and the cheers of the people that came to greet, and the thousand details that to repeat would only my verse encumber, till I fell in the reverie, sad and sweet, and then to a fitful slumber, when, lo, in a vision, I seemed to stand in the lonely Capitol, and on each hand far stretched the portico, dim and grand, its columns ranged like a martial band of sheeted spectres, whom some command had called to a last reviewing. And the streets of the city were white and bare, no footfall echoed across the square, but out of the misty midnight air I heard in the distance a trumpet blare, and the wandering night winds seemed to bear the sound of a far tattooing. Then I held my breath with fear and dread, for into the square with a brazen tread rolled one lone figure, whose stately head overlooked the review that morning, and he never bowed from his firm set seat as the living column passed his feet, but now rode steadily up the street to the phantom bugle's warning. And he reached the Capitol Square and wheeled, and there in the moonlight stood revealed a well-known form that in state and field had led our patriot sires. And his face was turned to the sleeping camp, afar from the river's fog and damp, with no flickering lights, no warning lamp, no wasted bivouac fires. And I saw a phantom army come, we never the sound of fife nor drum, but keeping time to the throbbing hum of wailing and lamentation, the martyred heroes of Malvern Hill, of Gettysburg, of Chancellorsville, the men whose wasted figures fill the patriot graves of a nation. And they came, the nation's dead, the men who perished in fever, swamp, and fen, the slowly starved to the prison pen, and marching beside the others, the dusky martyrs of Pillow's fight, with limbs enfranchised and bearing bright. I thought perhaps 'twas a pale moonlight. They looked as white as their brothers. So all night long marched the nation's dead, with never a banner above them spread, nor a badge, nor a motto brandished, no mark, save the bare uncovered head of the silent bronze reviewer, with never an arch save the vaulted sky, with never a floor save those that lie on distant graves, for love could buy no gift that was purer or truer. So all night long marched the grand array. So all night long till the morning grey, I watched for the one who had passed away, with reverent awe and wonder, until a blue cap waved in the lengthening line, and I knew that one was kin of mine. And I spoke, and lo, by that sign, awakened me frae my slumber. Hurrah, hurrah, we'll sound the jubilee. Hurrah, hurrah, the flag that makes you free. So we sang in chorus from Atlanta to the sea, while we were marching through Georgia. Hurrah, hurrah, we'll sound the jubilee. Hurrah, hurrah, the flag that makes you free. So we sang in chorus from Atlanta to the sea, while we were marching through Georgia. Bring the good old bugle, boys, we'll sing another song. Sing it with a spirit that'll start the world along. Sing it as we used to sing it, 50,000 strong, while we were marching through Georgia. Hurrah, hurrah, we'll sound the jubilee. Hurrah, hurrah, the flag that makes you free. So we sang in chorus from Atlanta to the sea, while we were marching through Georgia. Sherman's dashing Yankee boys will never reach the coast. So the saucy rebels said 'twas a handsome boast. Had they not forgot to last year reckon with the host, while we were marching through Georgia. Hurrah, hurrah, we'll sound the jubilee. Hurrah, hurrah, the flag that makes you free. So we sang in chorus from Atlanta to the sea while we were marching through Georgia. So we made a thoroughfare, a path for liberty, 50 miles in latitude, 300 to the sea. Treason fled before us, resistance all did flee, while we were marching through Georgia. Hurrah, hurrah, will sound the jubilee. Hurrah, hurrah, the flag that makes you free. So we sang in chorus from Atlanta to the sea, while we were marching through Georgia. While we were marching through Georgia. While we were marching through Georgia. Marching through Georgia, a great song that we would march to when we were on campaign. And what are the 79th New York, this Scottish-American regiment? Well, I was captain of Company G, later colonel. Imagine that. A lad born in Paisley, Scotland in the year 1828, rising through the ranks of the great 79th Regiment, originally a state militia, and here today at the beautiful Union League, also a guest of the Legacy Foundation. We hearts a nerve that never swerve when duty calls to arms. These noble lads in kilts and plaids, they fear not war's alarms, but on the field they ne'er would yield, but battle with the foe, and raise our glorious banner there, though blood shall freely flow. Mid clash of steel, or bugles peal, or death's relentless fight, while cannons boom and settling gloom shall veil them from our sight. But when the smoke, the pall has broke, the 79th will be victorious near the stars and stripes, the emblem o' the free. While Wallace sleeps, his memory keeps their courage firm and true. And Bruce, we find, is there enshrined, while all his laurels strew their path that leads to daring deeds, to glory and to fame, for freedom, for our noble Scots, is still a glowing flame. And when they come, we tap a drum, when war shall cease its roar. A loving throng with festive song shall welcome and adore, and many a lass will hand a glass and sing with merry glee in praise of those who bravely fought the battles o'er the free. Hurrah for the choice of the nation, our heroes so brave and so true. We'll go for the great Reformation, for Lincoln and liberty too. We'll go for the son of Kentucky, our hero so brave and so true. The pride of a sucker so lucky, for Lincoln and liberty too. Yes, we'll go for the son of Kentucky, the hero of Fraser Dumfries. The pride of the sucker so lucky, for Lincoln and liberty too. Well, we'll show it by felling and mauling our statesman hero can do. And the people are everywhere calling for Lincoln and liberty too. And up with the banner so glorious, the star-spangled red, white, and blue. We shout till our victors victorious, for Lincoln and liberty too. And up with a battle so glorious, the star-spangled red, white, and blue. We'll fight till our banner's victorious, for Lincoln and liberty too. Our David's good sling is unerring, the slave maker's giant he slew. And fight for the freedom preferring, for Lincoln and liberty too. Yes, we'll go for the son of Kentucky, the hero of Fraser Dumfries. The pride of the suckers so lucky, for Lincoln and liberty too. Yes, we'll go for the son of Kentucky, the hero of Hoosierdom prove, the pride of the suckers so lucky, for Lincoln and liberty too, for Lincoln and liberty too, for Lincoln and liberty too. That's a great song written and was used as one of Abraham Lincoln's campaign songs, especially in the year 1860. There's a man who was born in New York, and he became one of America's greatest poets. His name was Walt Whitman. And just on the other side of the river here, from where I am at the Union League, the beautiful Union League in Philadelphia, Walt Whitman lived some of his final years. And he was a Civil War nurse as well. And he wrote, "A sight in camp in the daybreak, grey and dim, as I frae my tent emerged, sairly sleepless. As I walked the cool, crisp air, the path by the hospital tent. Out there I see 3 forms on stretchers lying, untended, on stretchers lying, over each a blanket spread, ample, brownish woolen blanket, grey and heavy blanket, folding, cover and all. Curious, I stop in silent stand, and I, with light fingers from the face of the nearest, the first, just lift the blanket. Who are you, old man? Sae gaunt and grim, with long grey hair and flesh all folding about the eyes. Who are you, my dear comrade? Then to the second, I step. Oh, who are you, my child and my darling? Who are you, with his cheeks yet blooming? Then to the third, a face neither child nor old, but of beautiful yellow white ivory. Young man, I think I know you. I think yours is the face of Christ himself, dead, divine, and brother of all, yet here again he lies. We shall meet, but we shall miss him. There will be one vacant chair. We shall linger to caress him while we breathe our evening prayer. By the fireside, sad and lonely, often will the bosom swell in remembrance of the story, how lonely Willie fell, how he strove to bear her banner in the thickest of the fight, and uphold our country's honor in the state of manhood. And this was just after you began. But we shall miss him. There will be one vacant chair. We shall linger to caress him while we breathe our evening prayer. Sure, they tell us, free is a glory evermore. Miltic is brown, but it soothes the anguish only, sweeping o'er your heartstrings now. Sleep today, O early falling, in thy green and narrow bed, dirges of mingle with the tears we shed. We shall meet, but we shall miss him. There will be one vacant chair. We shall linger to caress him while we breathe our evening prayer. While we breathe our evening prayer. While we breathe our evening prayer. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank the Union League and the Legacy Foundation for letting me, Captain Joseph Lang, be with you here today in honor of our 16th American President, Abraham Lincoln. It is indeed a great honor for me, as a man who fought in the trenches, to sew the fabric of the Union back together after it was torn asunder, to be with you here today. I'd like to leave you with the thoughts of a man from the 89th Indiana Volunteer Infantry. And as the years after the war rolled on, and the veterans' parades became less and less populated by men who actually wore the blue in service of our young republic, he was wondering if anybody would remember the sacrifice made by those men between the years of 1861 and 65. And right after that, I'm going to sing you a song written by Julia Ward Howe, a great abolitionist, a friend of John Brown, by the way. And that will conclude my presentation for you today at the beautiful Union League. Hendricks wrote, "When the comrades have all parted, when the veterans are nae mair, when the bugle call is sounded on life's everlasting shore, when life's weary march is ended and the campfires slumber long, who will tell the world the story when the boys in blue are gone? Who will tell about their marching frae Atlanta to the sea, and who will halt and wait and listen when they hear the reverie? Who will join to swell the chorus of some old Grand Army song? Who will tell the world the story when the boys in blue are gone? Sons and daughters of this nation, you must tell of triumphs won, when on earth our work is ended and the veteran claims his own. You must all cherish old glory and our teachings pass along. You must tell the world the story when the boys in blue are gone. And you must, to that flag, your nation's emblem, you must pledge allegiance too. To that flag, our nation's emblem, may your hearts be ever true, that this country be protected from injustice and all wrong. You must tell the world the story when the boys in blue are gone. And you must keep your country's honor. Frae each stripe we hold all stain, and you must take the veterans' places and repeat the rolls of fame. You must keep your country's honor and your flag above all wrong. Then we'll trust you with our story when the boys in blue are gone. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He has trampled out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed his fateful lightning from his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. I have seen him in the watchfires of 1,000 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening dews and damps. I can read his righteous sentence by the dim and flaring lamps. His day is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea with a glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. So he died to make men holy. Let us die to make men free. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. His truth is marching on.
Ladies and gentlemen, this brings to a conclusion the formal portion of the 2021 Union League Lincoln Day observance. To take us out, as they do every year, here are the voices of the Orpheus Club. And to all of you, a happy Lincoln Day, and we can't wait to be with you in person next year.
The fateful light.